Christopher Quigley. How are you, man?
Well, doing very well. Thank you so much. Thanks, Rich.
No, absolutely. I appreciate you coming on. Really interested in walking through your storyline and seeing where you've been and where you're at now and how that plays out and the message that needs to go out to the world. So
Thank you. I'm looking
let
forward to
me,
the
uh,
talk.
yeah, let me give a brief introduction here for you for the audience so they can get a framework of who you are. You're the founder and executive director of Alchemia Art Workshop, a registered Canadian nonprofit based in Nova Scotia, specializing in immersive, site specific, socially engaged public art and architectural installations. You have 20 plus years in interdisciplinary art and design with a foundation in interior and urban design. You've created large scale public art, sculpture, and immersive environments across North America. You're the creator of Transformation of Dangerous Spaces, a
Yes.
transformative public art initiative confronting gender based violence through immersive installations inspired by your own near fatal stroke recovery in 2023. You are the developer of major projects like Ephemeral Series and Last Adventure Tours. The Ephemeral Series explores impermanence through sculptures like Ephemeral Monolith, while Last Adventure Tours combines live theater and existential themes.
Yep.
You have an education in design, formerly trained in interior and urban design, including education at Simon Fraser University and previously operated Agency Custom, a custom fabrication firm supplying architects and designers.
Yes, sir.
That's a broad range of skill sets.
Yeah. Yeah. And for the past 20 years, I've been building stuff for other people, for other artists and architects and designers and lighting designers and clients. And um, Yeah, it's been formative. It gave me the acumen to kind of be able to move forward with my own work and the things that I wanted to create. And as you mentioned in the intro, I had two strokes in April of 2023. And it shifted, it rewired my brain. I'm different. I'm a much different person than I was pre-stroke. Um,
Sure.
I can solidly say and affirmatively say that it rewired me. I'm like way more emotional than I was before. And I'm unashamed of it. There's no shame behind it. I just am.
Yeah.
And it really has helped kind of form these new works because um, I don't have that filter that filter of masculinity that we're all brought up with to don't show your emotions or it shows that you're weak, to man up, don't be a pussy, do these things and don't show you crying. I don't have any of that left. It's like it's having a near fatal stroke. It really makes you rethink and reformulate your own mortality and what's
Yes.
important. And what is important is not doing well, it's doing good.
Yeah.
And it shifted that in me. And that's how, transformation of dangerous spaces really was formed, was out of grief. And it was out of grief over somebody in my community that died. I didn't know her. And I always want to say her name because this person had a name. And her
Okay.
name, her name was Elaine Mosher. And her partner murdered her in their house. And then he murdered himself. And it affected me. It still affects me. And it affected me in such a way that at that point, was looking to be involved. I needed to do some good with the time that I had left here. And I risk mythologizing the the effect of the stroke, but I need to be careful that I don't offer too much mythos behind it. But it really fundamentally just changed who I was, and I feel things a lot more deeply. I cry really easily, but I just find that I was needing to do some good, and I approached Kellyanne Hamshaw, who is an executive director of a local transition house here in my little town. And I live in a little tiny town. I was living in Manhattan for 10 years, and now I'm living in a little eastern seaboard community of about 1,000 people. It's amazing. And when she died, it affected me. And I wanted to be involved, and I got a hold of Kelly, and I went to her with a housing plan to create some housing for women that needed it after they left the transition house so that they could reintegrate back into the community in a safe community. And we discussed buying the house that Elaine was killed in and converting that into a safe place for women to retransition back into the community,
Yeah.
and taking that space that was synonymous with something so negative and turning it into something positive. And Kelly was instrumental. She kind of saw my background. She looked at my portfolio. She saw the work that I've done for other people and said, would you be interested in trying something else? Would you mind creating something that addressed gender-based violence and intimate partner violence? And I took it really seriously. I was like, yeah, you know what? Absolutely. I definitely want to do this. And I took it remarkably seriously. And we had many discussions back and forth from that initial meeting at a coffee shop. And we call it our Waiting for Godot moments. And if you're not familiar with Waiting for Godot, I don't recommend reading the play, or unless you're a bit of a masochist, I would not suggest watching it either, because it's just about two people just talking, and there's a tree in the background, and they're talking about the systems that they're waiting for to show up, and the people to show up, and what it's going to be like. And I think at that point, we just kind of realized that we just couldn't wait for something to happen, that we couldn't wait for somebody else to build something. And I took that on. And Elaine was the sixth person in our province that was killed. And it follows there's a mass casualty commission that wrote a report that specifically asked men to stand up and to step up and to start taking a far more active role in both prevention and the solution of gender-based violence in not just Canada, but generally. And I was like, I want to throw my voice in this, and I want to create something. So I created this project. um, I went away for about 6 weeks. Kelly and I met interspersed, like intermediate, like we just met frequently during those 6 weeks. But it took me 7 weeks to come up with a full plan, and I came up with this idea of where are boys and young men socialized, and where we were socialized was mostly in school, and where we learned a lot of the vernacular, and where we learned the vocabulary, and how we learn to exact dominance over each other and violence was in the locker room, because that's where we all learned the language, and that's where that information was transferred on an analog source. And it was a physical space, not just metaphorical, it was a literal space. And that physical space was where I learned, I mean, I got physically assaulted many times in the locker room and in the boys' bathroom. I've been sexually assaulted in a men's bathroom. So I'm like, those were the spaces for me where this information was being transferred, where dominance was exacted, where dominance and violence was exercised. And I used that as the basis of the space that we need to address. And now we're dealing with this very different source, where we've got dangerous spaces which are virtual. And we have companies that are platforms that provide these virtual spaces, and they provide a pulpit with these men, these mediocre men with microphones, to propagate language and rhetoric that is far more dangerous and far more exacting than what I ever dealt with. And it's being done at a scale that is unfathomable because we are talking about men that have a massive following of tens of millions of young men that are listening to this language and realizing and understanding and are being taught that women are to be hated. It's their fault that they keep pointing the fingers at them. And I think that through this piece, I want to show the transition and how we've transmuted that techno or that socialization, that transfer of knowledge has gone from an analog source to a digital source, which is still behind closed doors. It is still done in secret, and they are being taught at a scale that we need to start addressing it. And we need to start addressing that these platforms are now complicit by providing these guys monetization, by providing them an audience. And such is the transformation of these dangerous spaces and why I created it and why I called it that and how it's moving forward.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Two things I want to point out right here is that I understand what you're saying from the perspective of you having a new emotional approach to things after your stroke experience. Um, I've always been sensitive, so I've always been affected by a lot of different things, and have uh, had the tendency to express my emotions sometimes uninstinctively, just because of how things affect me in a different way. But I think that's a key thing that's very valuable, that I don't think a lot of men and or women are able to be allowed to express naturally. I think it's been tamped down over the years and over generations. Um, Secondly, I think this is a very important topic, um, and project that you're working on developing, and I want to dive into that a bit more. What I'd like to do first, if we could, is go all the way back in time a little bit and start out with my only scripted question, which
Great.
is, where were you born and what was life like as a kid for Christopher?
Oh, I was born in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. My father was in the military. My mother was, when we were little kids, she was an elementary and kindergarten teacher.
Okay,
They divorced when I was 10. But the majority of my upbringing, I grew up on a horse farm and had a tremendous amount of freedom, had a lot of freedom. There weren't a lot of rules. I grew up at a time when you came home when the sun went down, but we lived out in
yeah,
the middle of nowhere and we learned to drive when we were 11 and 12 years old. Um, I used to, my Aunt Wendy was a bit of a car fanatic, which is now still in my zeitgeist that I love cars and I love vehicles. And I had put my efforts into trying to help her fix a 1966 Pontiac Parisienne that we used to take out on Sunday drives.
nice,
And then we rode rodeo. My sister and I rode rodeo until we were in our late teens. And I went to school in a small school of about 400 people. It was a very small graduating class, but in school, I dealt with a tremendous amount of violence. I was bullied relentlessly to the point of, I believe it might have been sixth grade, fifth grade, I can't recall, that I brought a knife to school because my bully was just so relentless that I didn't feel as though I had any out because it was just constant. And it wasn't just from one person, it was from, numbers of people that that kind of exacted their anger out on me for whatever reason. And I was a weird little kid. I was odd. I had horses and wasn't the most masculine. I didn't fit the masculine stereotype and was relentlessly bullied. and it just took its toll on me. It was, rooms that I got the shit kicked out of me more often than I can count. I had to learn how to protect myself against these guys. And it was, I would say it's formative because you don't really have much of a choice other than at that time to let it be what it's going to be. Like it just is. It becomes part of the normalized daily routine of this is what's going to happen today. And that's where I grew up. And the learning how to build things came from, being able to work with people, with my aunt who were fixing the car, from the body people to the engine people to the interiors to all of these people, to realize it took this team to create this car. And I really enjoyed that. And I kind of took that into my career, understanding that to create things, you had to have teams of people and understand that, your level of incompetence um, isn't a ceiling, but it gives you an ability to learn more, to bring the right people on board to help do that. And so my upbringing was one of those ones where I didn't think and I was never told I had limitations. I
Okay.
always was like, I can do whatever, whenever, wherever,
Yeah.
regardless. And in spite of the school upbringing and how it affected me and what happened, I just don't have in me that idea that I have any limitations on anything. Maybe that's just the males. That is probably the male socialization, being able to we just get what we want. Um, and so that was how I grew up. I grew up around really supportive women. My mother, my aunt, my grandmother. We all lived on the same farm. I grew up with really formative, really powerful women that formed me, and my sister and our cousins and even our neighbors. Our neighbor was a doctor. Two doors down. It was just I was surrounded by really strong women and
Yeah.
learned that, yeah, there weren't a lot of limitations. I was very lucky. I think I was very lucky in that respect.
Yeah, I could see that. Um, in regards to that, was it the case with your dad being in the military that he was gone quite a bit during that
No,
time?
yeah, ours, my dad was a air traffic controller, so he was
Okay.
he was stationed in certain places. But he was an aggressive man. Um, he wasn't the nicest to me.
Okay.
He was abusive, verbally and emotionally and physically. He was not a good man. He was one of the reasons when I was, I remember the very first time witnessing it, when I was 4 against my mother, where there was a glass of milk thrown in her face, a dustpan thrown at her, and then the smashing of glass. And I don't remember all the details, but that was what I remember. That's the person I remember. And we've in our family we've had police involvement, and it has not been without the stereotypical cliche things that happen to families that are involved with violence. And it wasn't anything. I can look back on a lot of those things and I made jokes about them because I thought that it was the only way that I could kind of deal with it, was to make fun of it, to take the power away from it. Being abandoned on a highway in the middle of when I was 15, being abandoned on the middle of a highway, having to hitchhike back with a trucker and to try to get myself back home because my father was too angry with me, cuffs me on the head and then pushes me out of the car and drives off and leaves me
Oh,
on the side of a highway. So these are the things that I recall. And so this isn't this work that I'm on isn't metaphorical. It's
oh,
historical, and it's
yeah.
all historical. It's all touch points in my life that I'm like, oh, these are the things that formed me. These are the things that made me, and these are the spaces that made me. So I keep referring back to it, but it was a bit of a this project has been a real catharsis to
Sure.
really create something that was meaningful but visceral and has the ability to really kind of touch some people, especially young men that need to be told, like, I don't know how old you are. I'm 52 now. Well, I'll be 52 in November. I don't want to age myself that fast, but I'll be 52 in November. And I look at the things and I see it because I see it pass through the algorithm and seeing that this stuff just can't go on. We can't say that this is okay anymore and be
Right.
like, oh, it's freedom of expression. It's like, no, women, boys are socialized in a very specific way from the moment they're born. Women are socialized in a way in response to the way that men are socialized. Their entire socialization is about protection. Our socialization is about advancement and about being oppressive. And women's socialization is done completely in response. So we have to somehow interrupt that loop. And that's what I'm hoping to do with this. That's what I feel like my goal is with this.
Yeah. Did um did you did you know your grandparents when you were younger?
Oh, yes, I did. My
Okay.
grandfather was in the army. He lived on the farm until I was about 15, and then he passed away from cancer.
Okay.
But we knew our my father's side when we were very young, but we didn't really have much of a relationship with my father's side of the family.
Okay. Um, was there any component? Um, you said that your aunt was very mechanical, um, like working on vehicles and stuff. And you're also on a farm, which farm life is fairly free, other than chores and different things like that. Um, was there anybody in the family that had that creative element to them that was kind of something that you were seeing uh, maybe out of the peripheral that drew your interest towards that outside of your aunt?
No, I
Okay.
think that this was a soul. This was always my. I was always on the creative side.
Yeah.
The and it was something that I cultivated and worked on even when I was much younger. I was in my late teens, early 20s. I was putting on, I was able to kind of rally the people around to create after hours and raves in Winnipeg when I lived there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's where I cut my teeth. It was like I already understood that it took groups of people to be able to make something happen. And I was able to, convince them to be like, hey, we should do this. We can rent this 4,000 square foot warehouse apartment in downtown Winnipeg in the warehouse district, and we can throw parties here until we get caught.
Right.
And that was and then I went, my original career. I used to work in hair world, and I owned a couple of salons in my time, and I worked for L'Oreal, and I've worked, corporate on that side, and then I went back into interior design and then urban design, and was like, this is all just part of, I think, just what I was always like. But my formative stuff, like when I was much younger, was my grandfather, who, I'm very tattooed, and so was my grandfather. So my idea of what I thought masculinity was big and tattooed. So
Right.
I patterned myself after my grandfather Archie, and I'm tattooed and
Same here.
yeah, and I'm big, and I always remember, what he was like as, he loved my grandmother. He was, they were good and they helped raise us. So I
Yeah.
had one person that was an amazing role model, and that was my grandfather Archie. He just let me do whatever. He helped me build go-karts and forts and anything I wanted to be able to create, with power tools, he helped.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I find that across quite a few of the stories. of the interviews that I've done so far that it's been a pattern that there is at least one set of grandparents that kind of offset some of what the experience is with the parents in terms of some love, extra attention, things like that, where it's almost as if that grandparent was supposed to be the parent, but you just kind of got stuck with the in betweener, their kid, kind of a scenario. Um, with
In
with
betweener.
being in school and experience that bullying so early on, and you mentioned that you're a little bit quirky as a kid and odd, and they're looking at the fact that you're on a farm and that's different for them. From my perspective, that wouldn't have been a scenario that was odd. All of my family's from East Tennessee, so
Oh, okay.
yeah, and me being here in Michigan, like my parents came up here in the late '60s because of the auto industry. My dad was a mechanic, so he worked on cars and everything. So it's more of a job opportunity scenario to come to Michigan. But all the family is there. So my mom's father had a farm, which we would go and stay there often for vacations and holidays and different things. And then my dad's side of the family, they lived in a smaller town at the uh, kind of at the foothill of a private Christian college called Carson Newman.
Okay.
It's Carson Newman University now. It's expanded quite a bit. But my dad grew up on a farm, so and they worked the farm. So farm life is familiar to me.
Yeah.
I understand what that's like. Can't really fathom the confusing experience of somebody saying that you're weird because you work on a farm or do work around a farm. That's pretty strange. But did you have any friends at that point that saw that you were getting bullied and kind of tried to befriend you and try to stick up for you at all at that time?
At that time, it would have been, I was friends with a lot more of the girls in school
Okay.
because I was like, I was taking drama class and I was just friendlier with them because I was such a weird kid. I was non-threatening.
Yeah, yeah.
And so my junior high and high school friends, like Kathy Buick, um, Sandra Plackner. There were a number, and then it was my sister. My sister and I were very close, and we've always been very close. And we were always thought of as being like a bit of twins, like Irish twins. But um, our availability for the amount of freedom that was availed to us on the farm, I think as we started getting older, a lot of the other kids in school started seeing like what kind of life that we had. Like we got to drive. We got to take a
Yeah,
truck out in the field whenever we wanted and bugger off for a few hours
yeah,
and not have to worry about it. And so when as we got older, more and more people wanted to come out to the farm. Like if they ran away, they wanted to come over to our place because there was just this wide openness and freedom that existed that I think that was really appealing. But the majority of my friends were always the girls. It was a lot easier to be friends with them because there was no fear. And they might have been experiencing their own things from boys in our school that were different, but they were still on guard with a lot of the boys because it's like, getting into high school and things like that, you're starting to experiment and you're having sex and going to parties and drinking and things happen. And those were my safeguards. They were always my safety. We were always in numbers. It was just it was a safe place. Those were the people that were the safe places for me. And I'm still very good friends with them even to today.
Nice.
That's the amazing part is that I don't get rid of people easily. I have a very hard time parting with people.
Yeah.
So I'm a bit of a collector in that way, and of not just material things, but of people that I really like that I'm like, no, you're now going to be a permanent fixture. And
Right.
so that's been my how I've developed my friendship networks, and I've maintained them my entire adult life.
Very cool. Very cool. When you got closer to high school, did did you gravitate towards athletics or sports or anything at all?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I was in on the basketball team, the volleyball team. I tried very hard. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be part of this. I wanted to be part of what was going on and to be kind of looked at. And I looked at it as a way to be irrelevant.
Okay.
I wanted to strive for some level of irrelevancy because that was what I'm like, okay, I have to be like them
Right.
to get that irrelevancy. And I didn't want to be the relevant person all the time. But, things still happen, like, yeah, things still happen. Other schools, teams come over and that you're going to be a target because it's a small town.
Okay.
And, my teammates might not be treating me poorly, but you can rest assured the opposing team would be. But I stuck it out. I always stuck it out. I'm like, this is going to happen. But even in those locker rooms afterwards, there were times that I would still get beat up, have my head stuck in the toilet, have my clothes taken, those sort of things always still happen. But I tried. I just kept on trying.
Yeah. Did you excel on that level of athleticism, or was it you you just continued to try and
Not
maybe?
even a little bit. I have not been, it was difficult. I found I liked it. Don't get me wrong. I liked it.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I really liked, I was a good swimmer. I was on a swim team because that's an individual sport.
Yeah. Yeah.
I like those things. And then also because of, the games that we would play, like the gymkhana sports with rodeo, because we were under 18, we weren't allowed to do the heavy stuff. So we were like pole bending, barrel racing, keyhole, like all the game sports we were allowed to do. And then we would do pleasure rides and go to fairs and do all that thing. So all the things that I really excelled at were individual sports where I wasn't part of a team
Okay.
until I
Gotcha.
played rugby, in my 30s. And then that was a far different experience. It was just a much different experience.
Right. Right. With experiencing that coming from other teams as well, because you're in a small town, and I'm guessing by the way you're talking, it's kind of like everybody sort of knows everybody within the area, and you're still getting that abuse even while trying to fit into the groups that are bullying you. Did you start to think potentially as you're getting towards the end of high school that I need to go off into something that's completely different from this environment that might allow me to escape some of this uh, pressure dominated environment?
Yeah, I moved to the nearest big city in, I guess it might have been 94, which is Winnipeg. It's just a small little city. The town that I came from was Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, which is just north of North Dakota. And so I picked up and moved to Winnipeg, Manitoba, and tried to find a tribe there and tried to find my group and find my footing. And I found them. I found people that were like me, which was really fun. I fell into really great groups of people and started party planning and owned businesses. I owned a hair salon with some folks in Winnipeg. I was producing and helping work these warehouse parties and raves in the mid 90s.
Yeah.
And the problem with that is that that within that realm and that that world. I was doing a lot of drugs and I was drinking and I was really partying really hard. And it was 1996. So we're only talking, I only lived in Winnipeg for a couple of years after I left the farm.
Okay.
Um, and ended up moving to Vancouver, British Columbia, just on a whim because I couldn't handle the winter anymore. And, you know, found a great group of people in Vancouver and stayed there until 2015. And then I moved to Manhattan and found another group and just kept on building, building, and building and building. And that was, it just seemed to be like this constant natural progression. But in Vancouver, I learned a lot. Like I worked for an amazing company for about a decade, honing my skills, working within the design field. But getting out of the little town and moving into a much larger town made me realize that I needed to be in a much larger city. I needed to be in something far, far larger, far more metropolitan, and with far more people.
Yeah, I totally understand what you're saying, and understand the rave culture too. Being here in Detroit, um, we've kind of have a little bit of that moniker of being techno city. Um, so there's a lot of DJs that we have here. A lot of DJs have come here over the years, especially since we're as close as we are to Canada and Ontario. And where I live, I'm right in between the two bridges that cross into
Oh,
Canada.
are you?
Yeah,
Okay.
from Michigan.
Okay.
So very familiar with that rave scene in the '90s, especially right around the warehouses that are near to the bridges.
Yeah.
um, and also too, because it was so close, drinking age in Canada is 18 versus 21 here in the States. So it was a quick jaunt right across the river into Canada, where it was
Yeah.
open season, so to speak.
Well, and those are the two birthplaces of house music was from Detroit and Chicago.
Yeah.
Two very distinct flavors,
Yep.
but that's where it was born. Those are the warehouses where it was born.
Yeah. Yeah. I want to go back to the rodeos for a little bit because
Sure.
that's a completely different world in terms of interaction, skills that are showcased, um, opportunities to meet different people from different areas, and so on and so forth. Doing those types of things, was that a space of relief for you?
I don't know. Do you have you ridden horses? You obviously have.
Yes.
There's no other relationship in the world that is similar to the one that you have with your horse.
Yeah.
It is one that is, built with trust and love and care and repetition. And yeah, it was a place of refuge. It was a place like being able to hop on the back of a horse whenever I want and go for a 3 hour trail ride by myself. You have long conversations with the animal you're on.
Yeah.
You're looking after it and it looks after you and it trusts you. And when you're playing the sports, you're pushing it as far as it can go, but it wants to because it wants to make you happy. They want to perform well. They want to perform. They want to excel. And when you mention my other artworks, the ephemeral series, which has like the ephemeral monolith and ephemeral man, I chose horse as the third because that was one of the strongest relationships that humans had to develop to develop everything. We went to war with them.
Yeah.
They helped till our ground. They created our agriculture. And so for me, going for choosing a horse for that piece, and it's made out of iron rebar and mineral blocks. That this ephemeral piece will be around for about 250 years as it dissolves and
Yeah.
creates other artworks over a period of time that will far extend beyond my life and beyond yours. But it will always be there for people to see and to see it go from one piece to another. But my love of horses was, I have a picture of me. I must have been about 2 or 3 years old, and I've got a little cowboy hat on and my little jeans and my boots, and I'm holding my winning ribbon. And I always say, this is not my first rodeo because I can clearly state when my first rodeo was. But I have another picture of me on the back of a horse, but we were always around them, and they were the animal that we just gravitated to. We just
Yeah,
they are unlike anything else.
yeah, yeah, definitely. The connection and the ability um, that they have to sense um, energy, sense feelings, sense heart between themselves and the rider. Uh, it's
Yeah.
it's an amazing thing.
They
Um,
know more. They know more than we do.
yeah,
And so when you're around a group of people like that, and I think that's why I really enjoyed that sport, was we were around people that were all the same. We were all, you all had to be, you couldn't be, I'll just say, you can't be an asshole and have a good horse.
right.
If,
Yeah,
if you're a bad person, your horse is going to know. Your horse is
yeah,
going to know before you do about other people that are around.
yeah,
It senses good people. It senses gentleness, like the same way dogs do when they introduce, themselves to others. Other dogs tell them what their owner is like, and horses do the same thing. And it was, I remember the very first horse that I got to buy on my own was this little filly that I got from a PMU farm in Souris, Manitoba, from a guy named Wilf McKay. Can you believe I still remember that name? And we're talking like I was like 13 years old, and I remember that. And my grandfather and I hopped in the truck with the trailer, and we went out to this field of all these newborn, like all these colts and fillies that were all running around. And we were just walking through, and we were waiting for whichever one was going to walk up. And this little filly walked up to me. She had four stockings, and she was sorrel, and she had a beautiful star blaze down her face, and she was gorgeous. She was a gorgeous little horse, and that was the one. And I took her home.
nice.
Yeah,
Very cool. And also very cool that your grandfather, again, was one that took you in that direction.
he was a good man. He was
Yeah,
such a good man. And I slept, the first week that I had her, I slept in the barn with her every night. Brought a sleeping bag out with me, and we just curled up together. Like, she was so not afraid of me.
yeah,
And I got to learn how to break her. I got to put the saddle on her for the first time. I got to, constantly test getting up in the saddle
yeah,
to get
yeah,
her used to me, and then got on her back, and she threw me off, and I got right back up and right back on that. And
yeah,
so literally getting back in the saddle, there wasn't, like, again, not even the metaphorical version. I have the literal version of getting thrown off a horse and being told you have to get back up.
yeah, yeah.
So
That experience is so profound when it comes to um, understanding, understanding yourself, understanding an animal that is deeply sensitive in its own right. Um, and I've seen I've seen the opportunities for healing and growth around different different communities within the states here where they're using horses to help in the healing process of individuals, and I think it's phenomenal because the ability to learn how to trust after many years of potential trauma that an individual goes through, as well as that horse sensing the growth that's taking place through that process of getting to know the individual as well. that back and forth of acceptance, and it's acceptance over a period of time. It's not instantaneous, but it's an acceptance of being able to sense each other, feel each other out, and then eventually get to a place of connection. I think that's very powerful. I think if I almost wish that rodeos were a little bit more um, popular um, towards the Midwest and the Eastern uh, states here in the United States versus being towards the middle and
Sure.
Western areas. Because I think that it would be just tremendously uh, prime for opportunity for people to get a different perspective outside of cities. Um, Now, also too, transitioning into a place where you felt that you needed to go to, being a bigger metropolitan area, to be able to expand. Did you find that when you slipped into college and started the education, higher education?
So I didn't start my higher education until I was an adult.
Okay.
I was, I owned a hair salon, the same thing. I owned a hair salon and body piercing studio in Vancouver, with a couple of friends. And I kind of went on that path. I was like, this was a lot of fun, and it was just a very different vibe. And I was creating, um, in Vancouver, I was creating my own little shows, little art shows. And one of the first ones I did was called Marked. And it followed just shortly after. So the Vancouver Art Gallery had a show with Lyle Tuttle. And if you're not familiar with Lyle Tuttle, he was one of the original OGs in
Yep.
San Francisco, and he was like the sailor art.
Yep.
And it was really a great retrospective of his work. But one of the things that we're missing was contemporary artists within our own community that weren't part of that show. And so I went to the Lyle Tuttle show, and I was like, this was, for me, it was transformative. I love the artwork of tattooing. I like the one-on-one that you get with the tattoo artist, and especially if you get a really good one that's got a great bedside manner. Ugh, that stuff
Yeah.
is amazing. Those are also relationships that you develop with this person over, like a couple of my sleeves have taken years to create, and we're still
Yeah.
very good friends. And so when I went to Lyle Tuttle's show, and the retrospective of all of that work, like both the pre-war and post-war work, one of the things, like I said, was missing was the contemporary guys in my community that weren't part of that show. So I created this gallery show called Marked, where we took really artful, beautiful photos of their work and displayed it in a gallery exhibition. And then I
Yeah.
had people come in to do performances, live performances, and music and things like that within this controlled environment of a gallery, and
Yeah.
learn like, oh, this is a really good transition. Like, it gets to show these people off. And in Vancouver, there were a couple of very well-known artists that used to work for a guy named the Dutchman in Vancouver, who does some incredible work, and he had some very, very, very talented artists that we promoted their work, and we took their best work and did these beautiful photographs and displayed them in a gallery show. And it worked out really well because it was like Lyle Tuttle got his limelight, and I wanted to be able to help my contemporaries get theirs. And
Yeah.
so that was kind of like the transition. And then I did another show called Tagged, and Tagged focused on graffiti art.
Cool.
And I
Very
have a
cool.
real affinity for graffiti art as well. You can see the piece behind me, the two here. And I've got another really large piece from a Japanese graffiti artist named Takasudo. So if you want to look up some really phenomenal fucking work, like, this guy creates some shit that I just was like, I just fell apart when I saw it. And I was like, I have to have that. And so I created this show called Tagged. And I brought this guy in from Australia. His name was Peter Daverington. Well, his name is Peter Daverington, and he's an aerosol artist. And he doesn't consider himself a graffiti artist. He is an aerosol artist, and his work is sublime. But he harbors a fairly significant amount of guilt about the medium that he uses to create his work. So he lives in a house that he built. He wears clothes that he makes, and he creates work with, which could be described as an environmentally destructive substance.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
so he balances this out, but he creates some artwork that is just mind blowing. So if anybody's looking for to look up some interesting artwork, look up Peter Daverington from Australia. And so then I got together with, like, I was introduced to a couple of very, very prolific graffiti artists in Vancouver, and they introduced me to more. And I got a professional photographer to follow them around and photograph their most epic work. And I gave them, they also were given a canvas, a large canvas and a budget, and they created these massive original artworks for the show. So we had the photography show, the gallery show, and then we brought in live music and performers that went along with it.
Nice.
And we produced this additional show. So I was really cutting my teeth on the art world and in that realm really early on in my early 20s while I was in Vancouver, because I was reinventing myself. I have a remarkable work ethic. Growing
Yeah,
up on a farm, you don't grow up on a farm without learning work ethic, because
exactly.
you got to get up at 5 in the morning to go feed the horses. You got to get up and go clean out the barn. You've got to go out and feed them in the evening. You've got to make sure they have water. You learn how to work.
Yeah.
God damn, you learn how to work on a farm.
Yeah, you
Wonder,
do.
wonder, oh, but I wouldn't pass it up for anything. But that kind of work ethic was something that carried me through, that I just was, and again, that idea that I had no limits. I could
Right.
just do whatever I want.
Yeah.
I kind of sound like Cartman when I say that, but it was very much like that, kind of like, I do what I want. And I just did what I wanted to. And so those were the things that I did. And those grew into much larger and larger productions and much larger and larger shows that, eventually I traveled across the country with events across the country.
Yeah.
And that ended. And then I went into, when I was in much older, that's when I went back to school to go into interior design.
Okay.
Yeah,
With
much older.
with doing the salons, doing the events and the shows and stuff like that, did you did you also find an opportunity of reprieve from the bullying type stuff at that point in time, or was it still a little bit tagging along with you throughout that?
I think, well, at that time, um, I think I had worked through a lot of it.
Okay.
I had surrounded myself with a really remarkable group of friends. And a lot of that stuff doesn't leave you. Like
No.
what I went
Not
through
at
will
all.
never leave me. It's like,
Yes.
but I can choose to acknowledge it when I want to acknowledge it. And I've had to with this project now, that I'm constantly having to bring up old feelings, pardon me, old feelings, and reconnect and kind of sort of, um, I hate to use this term, but to re-traumatize myself over what was.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I also, but as an adult, I've done a lot of therapy. And I
Okay.
strongly encourage that if you've never done therapy, therapy is an amazing tool. It provides you with some amazing tools. And I learned a lot from therapists about myself and about how to reconcile the past and to not let it rule who I am or become part of my identity.
Right.
That it is just a part, but that part, like if you were to look at your entire self as a clove of garlic, this, or a bulb of garlic, that this is just one clove, but the
Yeah.
rest of it is like, is the entire part. But you can choose to be like, is this the only thing, or is it all the other stuff that's important too, all the other cloves in the bulb of garlic? um, my my approach to it at that time, because I then started working for a company that was owned by L'Oreal, and that also, your confidence builds. I was, doing much better.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is something that you experienced growing up in your farm, but I was never afforded the ability to be mediocre. Like there's always
Yeah.
like the mediocre middle-aged straight guy that I was never afforded an opportunity to be mediocre. I had to be good at everything I did to be taken seriously, where, there was colleagues of mine that just phoned it in. I was
Right.
never afforded that opportunity. And on the farm, you couldn't be mediocre. You had to be
Right.
good at what you did
Yeah.
because you could get yourself killed. If you're, farting around with a combine, or you're on a thrasher, or you're on the auger, or you're on the baler and you're having to load up the truck, you get yourself killed.
Yeah.
So you had to be very good at what you did. If you're, when I was, 11 or 12 years old and driving the truck while the conveyor belt is bringing the bales up on the truck, if you drove too fast, everybody in the back would get hurt. If you drove too slow, the conveyor belt would get stuck and you could destroy the truck. So you had
Yeah.
to be good. You had to be good at driving. But that was the thing, is that I just learned really early on that I was never going to be afforded an opportunity to be mediocre. I couldn't phone anything in. I was not given that same privilege that a lot of guys that were my colleagues and at my same age were. I just didn't get that opportunity. I was never afforded that privilege of mediocrity, which so many straight white guys get. They get to have that. That wasn't for me.
Yeah. And two, it's one of those scenarios. Again, different environment and culture around farm, around rodeo, all of the. Because even in that environment, you cannot just half step things because you have so many powerful animals in those areas where one slip up or you're not paying attention and you could die in that arena as well.
Yeah.
So it's always, from my perspective, it's always a scenario of what did you experience that allowed you, that I look at as a step up in a sense, because that work ethic, that ability to have to be conscious and pay attention early on in life and what you're dealing with and working with on a daily basis because of necessity that you could potentially die, um, with the equipment, with the animals, all of that type of stuff. I always have seen that as kind of a leg up. Whereas, what you're talking about is the mediocrity, individuals who don't get to experience that. So they're not pushed in that direction to be more than what they are, what they can just get away with, kind of a thing. Um, and from my perspective, as we're having this conversation, I see that as a huge, huge asset that you've been able to develop and a characteristic that you hold, um, because you have those qualities. And I'm seeing that in your storyline, and I just want to highlight that for you and for the audience as well, because I don't know if a lot of times we don't always look at those uh, characteristics as powerful gifts that we have. We just think, oh, it's normal. It's just everyday
Yeah.
thing for me because that's what I had to do. But to hold on to that consistently, it it takes a lot of thought, takes a lot of heart, um, and it takes a lot of integrity to stick with that and carry that through across life. I just want to highlight that for you and the audience as well. Um, that is something that I'm seeing here in their storyline. It's a very profound thing. With shifting into or shifting away from the salons, the events, things like that, was there something that you saw with doing those things that you're like, I don't know if this is going to be sustainable. So I think I may want to move in another direction.
Yeah, I it was one of the last events that I did.
Okay.
that I realized that this wasn't for me anymore, that I needed some stability in my life because it was an unstable life to have. And I was creating this other show called Snapshot that was very different and eventually got turned into something that I had nothing to do with, unfortunately. And was picked up by Bravo and turned into a series, but not from me, which was really devastating. And that's what kind
Oh
of was,
yeah.
I was like, I was done. I had been producing this across Canada and was looking at bringing it down into the United States, into Texas and Chicago and LA and New York. And I was in Montreal. And I had finished producing the event in Montreal, and it was a disaster. Everything that possibly could have gone wrong went wrong, from an airline going out of business to my venue overbooking to an issue with my business partner at the time, and then all of a sudden finding out that this property, this intellectual property that I was trying to sell to my sponsor, we find out that one of the management companies that helped us bring talent into Canada for our event sold the show to Bravo, and we got cut out of it. We were eliminated from it, and then getting a call from my sponsor, my national sponsor, saying that we were no longer able to support this, that the intellectual property has been bought by Bravo. And that was the end of it for me. I was like, I'm over this. I was remarkably devastated. And it was one of those kind of situations where I was like, okay, time to reevaluate. So it took me a couple of years because it took me a few years. I had to sell my furniture, I had to sell clothes, I had to sell everything that I owned to keep myself. And I was essentially homeless, living in a dirty warehouse on the downtown east side of Vancouver, that a friend let me live there until I could get myself back on my feet.
Yeah.
And it took some time from there to, from experiencing that kind of catastrophic loss, where I wasn't dead. I didn't die. I didn't
Right.
suffer, any kind of physical issue. It was just all psychological, to be like so close to the golden ring,
Yeah.
only to have it snatched away. And congratulations to the group that did get to sell it. Amazing for them. But, fuck you. And I was so angry. It was just, and I just was like, I don't want to do any of this. But it took me a while. It took me a few years to kind of figure out what I wanted to do until I went back to school in 2006. So we're kind of jumping ahead a few years here. But it was 2006 when I finally decided that it was, or 2005, pardon me, 2005 when I finally decided that it was like, okay, I need to go back to school. I need a new career. I need a new plan. I need something to happen. So I went back to school.
And did you choose to go into industrial and urban design based off of an instinct, or were you naturally drawn to that from working, uh, doing the raves and stuff in the warehousing areas and the salon situation?
So no, the first, what I wanted to go into was, I was trying to get my business degree.
Okay.
So I had gone back to university and I made it about 6 months. So that would have been 2000. Oh, I'm actually missing some time here, but that would have been about 2000, mid 2004. And I went back to school for the first 2 semesters, and I was looking around the room, and I was in my head, because I was older, I was
Yeah.
older than most of the people around me,
Right.
that I was looking around going, this is my cohort. These are going to be the people that I'm going to be going to school with for the next 4 years.
Right.
And these are the people that I'm going to be interacting with. And I was like, this is not for me. I am in the wrong room. I am definitely in the wrong room. This is of no interest to me. These people are not people that I would, that I'm going, this just isn't the right fit. And I was like, it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And that January is when I went back to school. And I just immediately switched and went, oh, I'm going to go do this. I had the interview with a school, and it was with one of the art institutes. And I went back and I did a two year program from yeah, it was like '06, '05 to '08. So it was like a full 2 years of school. And I didn't go into it to be an interior designer. I did it the same way when I went into urban design, was to learn the culture and learn the vocabulary and learn the vernacular to do something with it, but not to be it.
Okay.
Um, I didn't go into it to be an interior designer. I don't have the constitution or the patience for that kind of work. I knew immediately, and I knew that I could get more out of this on the sales side. So working in this on the sales side, but having this background and having the vernacular and understanding what the terminologies were and understanding how that industry worked gave me another leg up into an industry that was really incredibly good to me for the better part of a decade in Vancouver and then another decade in New York.
Right. Right. Once you got into schooling, um, again, did you find a uh, an environment of kinship once you got into what you wanted to do, or did you experience any of the bullying residual at that level at either?
No, no, the that never really came in because I was a much more I was very aggressive in school. I
Okay.
took it very seriously and I was like, there was some fun that I had and I mean it was a really remarkable time. Like I loved it. I loved the education. I loved the cohort. I loved everything about it. But because I was an adult, it was just, and I had already gone through, some years of therapy previous to that, that I was just going into this. And I was like, I have 2 years. I need to focus on this, and this is what I'm going to do. And this is, I took it very seriously, and, did very well. I really enjoyed it, had a really great time, and got offered I was offered a job very early on. That was the job that I took. And I was offered a job um, from a company in Vancouver 6 months before I graduated.
Oh wow.
Yeah. I was taking this other external program because I was kind of focusing on lighting. I was focusing on lighting design and how lighting affects buildings and the mathematics and the architecture behind it. And that was really where I was kind of focusing my specialty, I guess is what you'd call it. Like I just became very specialized in lighting. And I was taking this external program with a number of other people that I had never met before. And I knew there was one company that I wanted to work for in Vancouver, and I had my sights set on. Like, if I'm going to be working in this industry, that's the one I'm going to be working for. And I was with this, small group, and we had a small group project. And the wife of the owner of the company that I wanted to work for was in my group, and I didn't know that at the time until we were finished. And she came up to me and she was like, thank you. That was really good. You're really good at this. And she goes like, where do you find yourself working in the next few years? And I said, I want to work for this company. And she pulls out a business card and she hands me the card and she goes, the owner is my husband.
Oh wow.
Yeah. And again, I'm risking mythologizing this, but I mean, there are things in the world that just happen that you're like, that can't other than be a myth, or
Absolutely.
it's myth. It is real. And she's like, I'll let him know that you're going to submit a resume. And I was like, oh, okay. So I think we finished the program on a Saturday, and I had my resume sent to him Monday morning.
Nice.
But we're still talking 6 months before graduation. And he is somebody in the industry, and his name is Darren Luce, and he was one of the most impressive mentors I've had in my career.
Okay.
And he taught me a lot. He taught me a lot about the industry. He taught me a lot about the business. And I'm jumping ahead, but he offered me an interview. And I went in for the interview, and then, it was successful. I was still a student. I was still a struggling student. So I had to go to the local thrift store to be able to find some decent clothes for an interview. So I was wearing these cruddy pants and this green shirt and a tie that matched. It was awful. And he said, we don't wear shirt and tie here. And I was like, oh,
Nice.
yeah. I was like, thank God.
Right.
But he offered about a week later, he phoned me and I was at school and he's like, I'd like to offer you the job. I'd like you to start right away. And I said, Darren, I said, I really appreciate it, but I have to graduate. I put too much time and effort and resources into this. I said, I am really sorry, but I have to turn you down. And I was heartbroken because that was the company that I wanted to work for. It was like, I went into it with that idea, I went into it with that intention. And then when I had to say no, he paused and said, I've never had anybody tell me no, that they didn't want the job. And I said, Darren, I need to graduate. I need to get this finished. And he's like, okay, I'll call you in 90 days. And I'm telling you, to the day, he called me 90 days later. So I was 3 months away from graduation at that time.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm gonna hire you. And I was like, ugh. I said, Darren, I've got 3 months. I don't graduate until December. And he's like, no, no, I'm going to put you on retainer and I'm going to pay you your salary until you graduate.
Oh,
You come in once a week, get yourself familiarized with the people, get yourself familiarized with the products that we're selling, but come in once or twice a week. But I'm going to pay you for the next 3 months until you graduate, and then you're going to start with me in the new year, and you'll have a full-time job and a career. And I was like, okay. So that's how it happened.
wow.
And he took a chance on a graduate that was from interior design that had never worked this kind of a sales job before and just let me do whatever I wanted. He was just like, I remember him telling, we had brought on our new VP of sales. And one of the nicest compliments Darren ever paid me was, Christopher doesn't need a lot of management. He's like a wind up toy. Just wind him up and send him out. He doesn't need to be managed. And I just thought that was the most impressive thing anybody had ever said about me. And I was like, oh my God, that is. I'm like a wind up toy.
Yeah.
Just wind me up, send me out, I'll come back.
Right.
And I had learned really quickly that there were architects, interior designers, public artists that were creating large scale public artworks. And that was the niche that I was like, that's the business I want to go after. And I created this world of public artworks and working with custom fabricators to create works for them, all based on this chance meeting of the company that I wanted to work for and meeting his wife Didge at this program we were both taking. It was just
Yeah.
meant to be, man. It was just like I was like, oh yeah, no, this is it. And I had an amazing 10-year run with him. I did very well. I did very, very well. I know how much money I made that company and I know how much money I made, but
Yeah.
I excelled. I just loved that job. I loved it.
That's an amazing story. And again, highlighting a characteristic in you, um, of having the integrity and also the work ethic, right? You're going to school, you've spent your time, your money, and you're almost finished, and you're presented an opportunity prior to finishing up, which a lot of people potentially would have just said, "Oh yeah, quit school, go to work." You said, "No, I need to accomplish this. I
Yeah.
need to finish this out," which I'm going all the way back to the farm, having to do the chores on the farm. You can't slack on that stuff. You have
You
to.
don't get to have dinner.
Right, exactly. That's where I'm going. You have to
You
you
don't get
have to
fed, man.
you have to do the work. And so this is showing up again. But the beauty of it, and two, you've just experienced a letdown of a creative thing that you've poured energy into, and it got snatched away from you by probably an organization that didn't have the heart and mind that was put into that concept, right? Gets snatched away and taken away. But yet, the synchronicity, and I call these, for lack of better terms, uh, within the creative community, I call them God winks.
Okay.
And it's just uh, a universal synchronicity that takes place where you're presented with something, and it's presented in a way that's going to test your fortitude. Number one, testing that integrity in you, testing that completive mindset. I need to finish what I started. And somebody recognized that in you as an asset and said, you know what? I'm going to call you back when you're telling me you're finished because I've already seen something that I'm really impressed with. And you got that call back, you went to work, and again, you got to do whatever you wanted to. You got the freedom to do, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's an amazing story. And the connection with his wife being there and her asking you what you want to do, and then she pulls out a business card and it's the direct link to do what you want to do. That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Fantastic story.
That would that like again, there's like things in life that are just truly kismet, and that was it for
Yeah.
me. It was just that was supposed to happen at that time. Because if
Yeah.
it didn't, it wouldn't have happened.
Right.
You
Right.
know, and if things in life are easy, they're meant to happen. You know, hard
Yeah.
things are meant to happen too, but sometimes the universe just gives you, they're like, we're just going to clear the path for you here.
Right.
Allow
Exactly.
us.
Yeah,
You know?
exactly. Exactly. After that tenure with that company, I'm assuming that after that is when you went to New York City.
Yeah, so one of the companies that we represented, we represent in Vancouver, we represented by the time I left, we were up to about 35 different manufacturers from around North America and Europe. And there was one specific one that I did a tremendous amount of work with.
Okay.
And we were, I was always looking for like the weird projects. And so we were, one of the last ones that I worked on, one of the last few that I worked on, there was one that I did with an architect named Chris Dore. And he did these 50-foot tall steel faceted trees, and you can find them. And if people like to Google stuff, you can look at the trees at 56th and Granville in Vancouver, British Columbia. And they are these 50-foot tall, they look like trees without limbs, but they are made out of white steel.
Oh
And
wow.
I was just like, I was beside myself that I got to work with him on this project and to help light it. And we had done some other really large pieces, like with Susan Maver, with the UBC polls, like the donor polls. I had finished doing a large scale park in Ottawa, Canada, called Lansdowne Park, where I did 145 custom pathway poles and catenary systems. So I was kind of like at this stage of my career where it was like, okay, my projects are just getting bigger and bigger and they're getting really fascinating. And this company offered me a job to take over their US business out of New York, to
Okay.
live in New York and to develop their company in New York. And all the way through this, I mean, they were at the time, we had done some amazing stuff together. If you ever want to look up another one, we were in the Guinness Book of World Records for the largest outdoor chandelier in Cleveland, Ohio.
Oh wow.
And no offense to Cleveland, Ohio, but if any city needed a chandelier, it was definitely Cleveland. And so this company, and we were involved with building that. And so we've done some really large scale pieces. And then I did another really large scale piece for Cadillac Fairview, which is a large property owner in Canada and the United States, and they own a ton of malls in all around North America. I worked with an artist named Ben Rubin on a large public art piece that they placed in their lobby. I worked with Metz and Chu. I worked with Dave. Oh God, David. Oh, Cheapers. I can't remember his name. Porter. What's his first name? But we did this massive piece for Georgia Tech in the library, which
Okay.
is this massive piece that's in the library. So these projects of mine were getting bigger and bigger, and really, we were doing some really phenomenal things to the point where we were getting brought in on competitions with other architects that were submitting things on a global scale, like doing the exterior of a stadium in Qiddiya, Saudi Arabia, as part of a competition, and then doing another competition for a mall in Kuwait. So we were getting brought in on these, much larger and larger and larger pieces. Um, yeah, I'm just thinking like even like doing, we did a massive dome for the Conrad Hotel in Washington, D.C. And just recently, I finished doing all of the like up to now, like just coming up to now. We're just finishing doing all the historical lighting for South Street Seaport in Manhattan. So we're
Oh,
doing
wow.
all the relighting for Manhattan, and now I'm working and I'm overseeing my final project, which is a 30-story facade for a company called CoStar in Richmond, Virginia.
Nice.
Yeah, so big things. But this company offered me this ability to go live in Manhattan. I would just turn, it was 2014, and yeah, they had offered me this position, and I was like, buy a 911, go to New York.
Right.
Yeah, I was like, New York. I wanted to go to New York. So I packed up my life and moved to Manhattan and lived on the Upper West Side for about 10 years. And so 2 years out of that was working for this company on contract.
Right.
And it ended and I didn't want to work for them. But in that time I had created a business plan.
Okay.
That was be like, if I was to be this, like if I was to work with this type of a company, but I wanted to be on a much larger scale, but much like the company that I worked for in Vancouver, what if I represented like 17 or 18 custom manufacturers and promoted them around the entire United States and Canada? So I brought on 17 fabricators and started doing large scale work with them, all custom work, all, artworks, architectural statements,
Yeah.
custom, like you're going into doing competition work with other architects and being their manufacturer of choice. It was
Amazing.
it was a wild, it was a wild 10 years, but was met with a lot of obstacles where much like the the loss of the show when it was bought by Bravo, I was constantly interrupted and constantly having to pivot. So, first there was like a divorce, and then there was COVID, and then there was like moving back to Canada, basically getting kicked out of the US, and then the stroke. And I was like, I can't pivot anymore. I don't want to pivot anymore, especially after the stroke. I just didn't have it in me.
Right.
I went through too many things to try to keep this company above ground, and I was like, I just don't have it in me anymore. I don't. I'm done. This is like, okay, the universe. I'm hearing you. It's like you can't do, like, literally. I had to have a near fatal stroke to be like, okay, okay, okay. I hear you.
Right. Right. Yeah. A lot of times that's that's what happens to individuals who essentially overlook what their body is trying to tell them in terms of stressors and different things that they're trying to just continuously move to avoid, and the body's trying to tell you something, and then eventually it shuts down. Um, Through that time of getting to New York City, being one of those larger metroplexes that you were looking for, needed to get to
Oh yeah.
in your life. How did that shift your mentality and your heart space, being able to step into one of the biggest cities in the world?
So it makes you hyper aware.
Okay.
New York is one of those kind of, and I people are always like, "Oh, what's it like living there?" And I'm like, "It's really terrible. It's a wonderful
Right.
city. Oh my God, I loved it." But the way that I have always explained it, I said, the way that you kind of have to understand what living in New York is like is that everything's hard, everything's difficult. There isn't anything easy about living here. You can be the richest person, you could be the poorest person. New York is like one of those cities that's the great equalizer.
Yeah.
It's an equalizer because you all have to take the subway.
Yep.
You want to understand what it's like. I equate it a lot like you wake up every morning, get out of bed, and you know that the moment the alarm rings, there's at some point during the day, some point, you might not know when it is, you might be going grocery shopping, you might be just leaving the building, you might be getting on the subway, you might be getting to the office. At some point during the day, you're going to get kicked in the crotch. You don't know when, you don't know what, you don't know how, but you know it's going to be hard and it's
Yeah.
just going to come at you. That's what it's like living in New York City. Constantly aware that, oh, at some point during the day today, I'm going to get kicked in the crotch. That's it. That's
Yeah.
what every day is like. And you just become hyper aware, hyper vigilant. And I think there's a part that calcifies because you become hard, you become
Yeah.
harder. And I've had one friend explain it to me who's been in prison, and he's like, it's kind of like being in prison. I went, really? He's like, oh yeah. If you can come out of New York alive, and he's like, yeah, it's a bit like being in prison. We're like, oh, okay, because it hardens you.
Yeah.
It takes away some of your humanity. It takes away some of the gentleness that you might have had before, and it makes you, yeah, it just makes you cold because you can't let people in as easily. You have to be hyper aware of the people that you let in your life because it is a very transient, transactional city of
Yeah.
what can you do for me.
Right.
So you become really aware of this, and you become, you start to everything becomes very close and very, yeah, just very close and very armored. And
Yeah.
so that was one of the things that I left New York with.
Okay.
And, I left unceremoniously, but I left nonetheless.
Right. And you had mentioned that some of these pivots that you're making, one being a divorce, the other being kind of kicked out of the U.S. Um, do you mind going into those just a little bit, just to give a
Sure.
brief view of that?
Yeah. The divorce itself was something that was a long time coming. So there wasn't a lot of I mean, it was heartbreak. And I mean, any divorce from anybody that you've been with for, more than 10 years is, and almost 15 years. It's going to be a difficult transition. But I look at that as that had to happen. It was just like, we had gone in two very different paths, and it was just, it was not a good scene for either of us, which is fine. And so there's not a lot of animosity that I harbor towards that.
Okay.
So that pivot was just having to figure out myself because I'd never lived on my own for years and years and years and years and years. So having to figure out how to live alone again,
Right.
which I really enjoy and I highly recommend. Um, I always say have separate sinks. I'm like, have separate homes. Makes every relationship easier. But the pivot when I got removed from the US was, it was stupid. I did something so stupid. And it was one of those things that I still look at it and go, I can't believe I didn't take care of my business. And on every passport, because I had what's called a investor visa in the United
Okay.
States so that I could run my company in the US and live there and do what I had to do. And I had an investor visa. And every 2 years or within 2 years, you're supposed to get a stamp, which is called an I-94 or I-95 stamp. And the last time that I had been in Canada and had crossed the border was 2019 after the death of my grandmother. And I went to go to her memorial and I got my stamp in December of 2019. So I need to make that like December 2019. So we're talking, January 2020, February, March, three
Yep.
months before COVID.
Right.
And in New York, um, you know, that was uh, that was a remarkable time. That part I don't like talking about. So if we can,
Yeah.
I don't like that because it was horrific.
Yes.
New York during COVID, and it was a horrific, horrific time.
I think
What,
that says enough for
yeah,
everybody. Yeah.
I don't want to discuss it at any length. But I had to, and I didn't take care of my business because I put my passport away in my safe and I didn't look at it again until 2022. And I went to Mexico for my birthday and flew there, flew back, and got flagged
Oh man.
because I didn't overstay my visa. That was the thing that I was very calm. Like, no, I still had many years left on my visa,
Yeah.
but I had overstayed the I-94 stamp by a year and a half. And
Oh
it
wow.
never even occurred to me. It didn't even enter my mind that this was needed to be done. And I went to Mexico, had a great time, had a wonderful experience, and came back and got caught at the border at JFK trying to re-enter the country. And they're like, Mr. Quigley, we need to, when was the last time you left the country? And I was like, oh yeah. It was like, and I think my grandmother's obituary was still in my passport. And I said, oh
Okay.
yeah, no, that would have been 2019. I was like, oh yeah, December 2019. Very, just like you're asking me a question. Oh yeah, December 2019. I
Right.
said, yeah, I went to my grandmother's funeral. And I was like, oh yeah, her obituary. And they're like, they said, you need to come with us. And it went into a red folder. And as soon as I saw the red folder, I was like, oh no, this is bad. This is really bad. And yeah, I was held in detention for 3 days.
Oh man.
Yeah, and then put on a plane back to Canada with all my clothes that I only had from going to Mexico, heading
Right.
back to Canada in November with
Oh,
nothing but farting around clothes for Cancun.
right.
Yeah. And then spent, what was it? I spent the next, so November, December, January, February, March, April. So the next 6 months trying to get a waiver to get myself reinstated
Wow.
and had to hire lawyers to basically apply for a pardon or what they call a waiver so that I could get reinstated so I could because I was banned for 10 years from
Right.
going into the States. And I was like, that's impossible. How is this possibly happening?
Yeah.
And that was the biggest, that was again, I made a massive error and I don't even know how I made that massive error. And I look at it, I'm like, what the fuck did I do? Why did that happen? But I went back to Vancouver and was staying with my best friend, and she put me up for the first 10 days while I was licking my wounds and trying to find a place to live in Vancouver with having to take me to go buy all new clothes and then finding a place to stay, trying to figure out where what am I gonna do?
Right.
I'm back in
Right.
Canada after 10 years. Really? Almost
Yeah.
10 years, 8 years, trying to reestablish and yeah, having to pivot the company again. And yeah, hopped in. I bought a car. So I'm like, well, I need a car. If I'm going to be here, I need a car. And I drove across the country. I drove across the country till I ran out of land. And that is how I ended up here in Nova Scotia. And then that following that April 25th, 2023, I had a stroke in front of a pie shop. So it couldn't be anything more poetic than stroking out in front of a pie shop. I don't know what is. Could have been worse. I always thought it could have been like had a stroke on a toilet and died like Elvis, but I was like, this was the way it happened. I stroked out in front of a pie shop.
Yeah. And from that experience, um, was it? was it a scenario of a creation of stress that potentially caused that, or was there just something internally?
Internal.
Okay, got you.
Yeah. We didn't know. I only found out this year how it happened. And I thought I had they thought that I had a blood disorder called hemochromatosis that would have
Okay,
created the clot. But there were other factors that created the clot that gave me the first one on the left side and then the one on the right side.
got you.
Yeah.
And were they back to back, or
I know that, well, the one that happened was at 10 in the morning on the 23rd, April 23rd.
okay,
And that happened at 10 in the morning. And I don't know when the second one happened.
got you.
But when I was in the hospital, they figured out that I'd had one fairly quickly through a CAT scan because they're like, okay, we can see this one.
Yeah,
But they didn't see the right hand side. But the right hand side one happened somewhere during the time while I was in hospital.
okay,
But the way that it was presented to me was we have good news and bad news. And they're like, the good news is you didn't have a brain tumor. And I was like, I didn't even know that was on the menu. The other one was like these kind of strokes come in clusters. So you may have another one, you might have a third one, you may have more of these, but we don't expect that you're going to survive. And I was like, oh, and you think that and I look back on this and I look at it and I always thought that in movies and TV we always see when people are presented with their mortality they have this religious epiphanal moment and this moment of profoundness. um, it hit me like it was, can you pass the salt? It
right.
was matter of fact, and I was like, okay. And they're like, you need to call your family, you need to get your affairs in order. And so for the first 2 days that I was in the hospital, they had me in emergency because I was constantly being looked at.
Yeah,
And for those first 2 days, every time that I lost consciousness or when I fell asleep, I was like, oh, this could be it. I'm not waking up after this
right,
because I didn't know. I was like, this was, but I just took it very matter of fact, and it's like, okay, and yeah, I made it through, and I didn't. They had the two. I didn't have any more after that, and then I was in the hospital for about a month, and after the second stroke, whenever it happened, I mean the left hand side one was very large and very close to my brain stem. That was the reason why they're like, we don't think that, if you have another one, this could just push the clot into your brain stem, and we don't expect that you're going to survive. So I took it, like I said, I took it like very, very matter of factly, like, okay, oh, okay. I had to call my mother, let her know. And, I didn't say anything, but there was a really good chance that by the time she got to me, her and my sister, that I would have died on while she was in the airplane. That was a very good chance, but I didn't want to tell her that. I didn't say that.
right.
I was like, I'll just let it, whatever happens, happens. But yeah, and then I was in the hospital for a month recovering and saw the world and felt the world very differently. And I remember so very clearly what things looked like and what things felt like. Just how I saw the world was, like if you've ever seen a Polaroid,
Yeah,
that's what everything looked like. It was kind of like pixelated 1970s photo album pictures with a
okay,
sepia, with an orange sepia tone. It was
yeah,
weird. It was, I don't know how to explain it other than it was just the weirdest sensory experience my body's ever felt. It was odd. It was just crazy. It was the weirdest shit was happening to me. And I couldn't understand where sounds were coming from. So if somebody was standing in front of me talking, it was like from over here, or it was over there. And it was multiple people talking. I couldn't tell where stuff was. I don't know. I just couldn't understand. I had no taste, couldn't taste anything.
okay,
Yeah, until I was in the hospital. And then all of a sudden I could taste tomato soup. It just came back like a light switched.
right, right.
But and I couldn't walk. That was the other. I couldn't walk without a walker because I was constantly tipping over. I
Right.
couldn't sit up straight. It was nuts.
So you lost all sensory perception, essentially.
Coordination, yeah,
Yeah.
all of that sensory coordination. It was wild.
As a creative, can you expand just a little bit on what, if you can,
Yep.
what that loss of connection point felt like mentally?
At the time when I was in the hospital, I didn't think about it.
Okay.
What the first things that I asked for as soon as, and I still have them here, the first things I asked for um, were coloring books and pencil crayons.
Okay. Yeah.
That was the first thing that I said, I want this. I want everything that you can bring me because this isn't going to be, I couldn't color within the lines to save my life. But I was like, I am absolutely going to make this happen. But I wasn't focused on anything. I wasn't focused on the company. I wasn't focused on anybody or anything other than me just getting better and doing all the things that I had to do to get better. That was
Yeah.
it. I didn't think of anything else. I'm like, okay, I have to walk. I have to get up and walk every day. And I did. I was told, and I don't mean to be, overshare with this, but I was told that when I went to the bathroom, I had to be very careful because I could trigger my vagus nerve and I could
Yeah.
have another stroke. So I
Yeah.
was like, these things, I was like, okay, I have to be conscious. And then I wanted to start physical therapy immediately. And they were like, well, you've only been here for 4 days or 5 days. Like we're gonna hold. I'm like, no, I need to get into the gym. I need to get into physical therapy immediately because it was like, I'm going to walk. This is not going to be how I'm going to live.
Right.
I'm going to
Right.
work through this. I'm going to get through it. This is going to be, I'm going to fix this. That was the, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to
Right.
do everything I have to do to be able to fix this.
Yeah.
So
Those
I did.
That's those characteristics that you have coming out again. That determination, that being able to dial in and get something done. Um, in terms of the what they're telling you about, going to the bathroom that you may trigger an issue there. I understand what that is viscerally because I have vasovagal syncope.
Oh gosh.
So I know exactly what that is when you wake up in the middle of the night, go to the bathroom thinking, I'm just going to go to the bathroom. And then wham,
Yeah.
you're out like a light because your heart is not functioning. It's already been too relaxed and your body's trying to move too fast and it can't catch up fast
No.
enough. So I
Yeah.
understand.
And I didn't want to die on the toilet. Honestly, I was like that one person is enough, Elvis died on the toilet. I'm like, I am not going out that way.
Yeah. Yeah. Once you are able to get out of the hospital, you get back into the working day to day, what you're trying to do. You mentioned that was a pivotal moment for you, that experience, and it shifted the way that you wanted to approach things moving forward. Let's move into that.
So when I got out of the hospital, the business was put on hold.
Okay.
It held no importance. I was unable to look after myself, so I was actually living with a couple of friends in this small town that brought me into their home because I was, all across the country. When I was driving across the country, I was staying in these remote cabins and remote houses in the middle of nowhere. Even when I was here, I was all the way at the farthest end of the province that I could possibly get and staying, as far away from people as I possibly could. And so where I was planning on living was going to be out in the middle of nowhere. But I had my dog, and there was at that time there was I would not have been able to look after myself. I could barely, I was just starting to be able to stand up straight and not
Yeah.
fall over and not walk with because I was bound and determined to get out of the hospital and not have to have a walker or a cane. But they were insistent that I have the cane, and I was like, absolutely not. I am not. I am going to get through. I pushed. And so these two friends of mine brought me into their home. They gave me a room for 6 months, and all I did was recover.
Yeah.
But it was in that recovery time that I started creating everything else. This project right now didn't exist, but I wrote the synopsis, and I wrote Last Adventure Tours in
Okay.
bed, based on the fact that I just, while I was in the hospital, I didn't have a lot of choice about how I was going to leave this world. Like I had no
Yeah.
choice.
Yeah.
So I didn't know if the next time I woke up that I would be a quadriplegic, or I would be dead, or I would have no function in my body and I'd be in a nursing home for the rest of my life. I didn't
Yeah.
know, and I didn't have any choice. And in Canada, we have an organization called MAID, which helps people end their lives on their terms and
Okay.
gives them some level of body autonomy. It's government involvement, and it is euthanasia, but it is on your terms.
Right.
And I'd been exploring this and being like, okay, if this is going to be the case, because there's a very good chance that I could have another stroke right now, or in
Yeah.
5 minutes, or in
Right.
5 years, or in 15 years, or never. But I wanted to be able to make sure that through the rest of my life, that if something were to happen like that, where I was incapacitated, that there was some plan involved,
Okay.
that there was somebody that was going to be there to be like, this is not what he wanted.
Right.
This is what he wanted.
Yeah.
So I wrote this play. I wrote this play about a character named Max Hawthorne, who is a enigmatic entrepreneur that starts a company called Last Adventure Tours. And he dubs it Make Your Last Adventure Your Best Adventure. And
Yeah.
it's these group of people, it's characters, about 12 characters that range in age and demographic and status, social status, that are all approaching this company to end their lives on their terms. They all have some problem, some immediate problem, but it's really meant to focus on autonomy and body autonomy, that it's my body, my choice, that this is how I don't want to be left in a vegetative state in a nursing home the rest of my life. But if I have an opportunity, I want to end it on my terms and leave the legacy behind that I want to leave. So I wrote that play while I was in bed for 6 months. And that's what I focused. I created all these characters, and I created this world. And my best friend Jennifer is one of the characters in the play. I'm fairly certain that Max Hawthorne, the lead character, is me. But it is meant to be this piece that confronts this other ability that we should have about how we leave our legacy behind when we have a terminal illness. And I met with a number of people and policymakers and some people that have been involved about how they did it and how their family member did it. And I heard these amazing stories of people throwing like a 1920s flapper party, and all their friends come by and they're drinking and smoking and dancing and listening to music and having a great meal and toasting each other with champagne. And then the host just removes themselves and goes to a room with their family and leaves the way that they want to leave the party. It's the ultimate Irish exit. And so this entire that play is part of Alchemia and part of our kind of mandate to create work that transforms people.
That's amazing. It's an amazing story. It's an amazing expression as a creative, um, being put on your back literally, um, but yet still having that in you to come up with creativity, an expression, a thing that is adventurous, um, and not it's not being stuck in the literal physical place that you were stuck of a hospital setting. You took yourself out of that setting mentally, by creating. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I think that's a great testimony um, for the ability of creatives to be able to overcome certain situations that they're in, if they're willing to step into a creative process and get through the difficulty.
And the other side of this, and to add to what you're saying, because that's incredible, is to lean into it.
Yeah,
You have to lean into it. You're like, you got to lean into whatever that piece of adversity was. You know, for even for me, when I was, you know, I just said, I'm not creating other people's work anymore. I've done it really well. Now it's my turn. I have a voice and I have a legacy that I want to leave behind.
yeah,
And I want to do, you know, my entire career, I've done very well. I've done very well for myself. I don't, but have I done a lot of good? No. This is my turn. This is my time for the second half of my life to focus on the things that I want to make and do some good.
yeah, for sure. We started off the conversation discussing your project, and we dove into that a little bit in the beginning. But I'd like to take some time here as we're getting close towards the ending of this, but expand on it a little bit more. Let's give the audience a broader perspective of what you're doing with this exhibit that you've created.
So, what exactly it is, and where does it happen, and how does it work? It's a traveling immersive art experience. It's meant to travel to galleries, universities, colleges, um, within a controlled gallery environment. It is reimagining one of the spaces, two bathrooms and locker rooms, where we learn gender-based violence and the vocabulary and the customs that go along with the socialization that boys and young men are going through. And it's one of those kind of places that hides in plain sight. It's meant to be full-scale reproductions of public bathroom stalls that have a tremendous amount of immersive and interactive technology added to the interiors of them that focus on, um, there's 8 of them, there's 8 stalls in total, and they
Okay.
are, each one focuses on a specific uh, theme of gender-based violence and how it's learned. And we chose this spot and we chose this place because it's where men are taught silence, where we're taught complicity, and where fear is instilled, and where boys and young men learn to perform power, and they do it on each other. And so this is an analog space with a digital overtone. It's meant to be immersive and interactive and confrontational. It's meant to be a space for young men and boys and even grown men to understand their own complicity and their own role in this. Because I'll even admit, you know, I have not been the best. I have, you know, as I said earlier, I've laughed at jokes I shouldn't have. I still learned those things in those spaces from my friends. I, in the past, have warned girls against some men that were my friends, and
Yeah.
not confronting the guy, telling my
Right.
girls to, like, you need to protect yourself. This is
Right.
complicity because I'm not, we never addressed it. So the the project itself is just meant to expose that evolution, and it's meant to expose that for a reckoning, not to shame men or not to blame them, but for us to be able to sit down in this mess that we've created, because intimate partner violence is not a women's issue.
Right.
They have borne the brunt of it. It has become their problem. This is a men's issue. And we are the ones that need to step into this to go, no more. This can't happen anymore. But to start that, we have to look at one of the spaces where we learn it. and where it's learned, where that learned behavior starts, where the information that's passed from our fathers to sons, from uncles to sons, to uncles to nephews, to all of this is meant to kind of provide a mirror to go, we have to acknowledge this before we can even fix this, because we've all had our own points of, where, I always like to say it's the worst line somebody can use. Well, it's not all men. Well, no, it's not all men, but it is men. Yeah, yeah, no, you're right. It's the violent rhetoric that we hear comes from men, directed at men, and I want to expose that, because I don't want to leave this earth without doing some good and doing something that will help address this and help fix it.
Yeah.
And I don't have all the answers. I never profess to. I can talk a lot. I can talk a good game. But the reality is that this is just one man's voice, one man's contribution to saying, hey, this is where we learned it. Because we can all agree that we're like, actually, yeah, this is one of the spaces. Like, yeah, I wouldn't go, I had a friend of mine yesterday at a party tell me, he goes, I wouldn't go to gym class because I was just ridiculed so much by the other guys, or the language that was in there.
Yeah.
And I was like, this is a common universal space that we've all experienced some violence in, either the locker room or the bathroom.
Yeah.
It's the universal male experience, and it's the socialization. And that's what this piece is meant to confront and to address and to fix and hopefully fix. And that's my role in this piece right now.
And is this, I understand fully that this is a legacy piece for you as well. Is it somewhat cathartic as well in the fact that you experienced this on a visceral level as a kid growing
So for
up?
me, just so you understand, I've had to start with a therapist again, because I've had to tap into
Okay.
stuff
Yeah. Yeah.
that I was dealing with. Like, I've had to go back in and bring in emotions and bring up emotions that, I mean, at the time were objective emotions, but you got to remember, I'm 52, and these happened when I was a teenager and a young man. So there is a tremendous amount of time that has passed that adds a lot of subjectivity
Yeah.
to those objective feelings that I had. Like, are these being more mythological? Are these like much larger than I remember them? But I did have to go back to therapy, because it's hard. Like, for me, again, as I said before, I cry really easily. When we were talking about horses, I was
Yeah.
starting to well up, and I was like, okay, I can hold this in, because I was actually going to ask you to break for a moment, because I wasn't sure if I was going to be able to hold back. Um, but the this is kind of one of those, when I realized that none of us are immune. None of us were immune,
Yeah.
and you can come out of this better. But even for me, I've been still affected by it, because I've had to tap back into stuff and remember things that happened to me. And if anybody's ever been, for the amount of times that I got beat up in school, I remember every one of them very clearly. I remember what people were wearing. I remember what the bathroom smelled like. And even to the point when, I was sexually assaulted when I was a young man in a bathroom. And I remember absolutely every detail,
Yeah.
about the tile on the floor, to the door, to the like every to the writing that was on the bathroom wall. I remember every detail, and having to relive those repeatedly, because of developing this piece and having to write it out. And then also including survivor stories and survivors' experiences, like women's experiences. One of the hardest ones that I had to do, and I can get through this. One of the hardest ones was the 8 stall that I had to create, which is called the 21-second stall. And it's 21 seconds. The participant enters the stall, the door locks automatically, and you're in there for 21 seconds. And 21 seconds is how long it takes a human being to pee.
Okay.
It's how long the human animal takes on average 21 seconds. And I wanted to explore the idea of how much violence can happen within that 21 seconds. Whether it's the last 21 seconds of a 911 call, it's the last 21 seconds of someone's life. And that one was very hard because I'm having to listen to experiences from other people that are remarkably violent and including that in this piece. So one of the major suggestions came from Sue Bookchin, who is the executive director of Be the Peace Institute. She was one of the authors and one of the contributors for the mass casualty report. And when she read it, she emailed me and just said, I had a very hard time getting through this. This was a remarkably emotional, very visceral piece. I experienced a lot going through this. How do you plan on addressing that? Are there going to be trauma informed therapists? And I went,
Yeah,
what?
yeah,
Because in my head, I'm like, just push him in the deep end of the pool.
yeah. Right.
And once she kind of gave me like what her experience was as a reader, just a reader,
Yeah.
and what that was like, I was like, oh. So I've been working with communities across Canada that when the piece comes in, we have trauma informed therapists at every installation that kind of give a preamble prior to entry, that there
Excellent.
has to be explicit consent being provided, because that's the other part of this, is that I explore consent in this piece.
Yeah.
And how we explore consent, and how that actually evolves itself. And I want people to have that explicit consent being provided to them, that they have to provide it to us before they go in. But at the end of it, after you've gone through and you've experienced each of the 8 stalls, you're brought into a group to debrief and to talk.
Okay. Nice.
So that therapist will be there, that community member will be there to walk people through their feelings and how they want to deal with it afterwards, because there's a very good chance that this could re-traumatize and open a lot of wounds for people.
Yes.
So having the trauma therapists on site at every gallery installation and during every installation is imperative to the piece.
Yeah.
Because even for me, when I still read through it, I cry. It's hard. It's hard. Like the 28 pager is a really hard one for me to get through, because I've had to go through so many things and so many stories and include it in this, that it's hard not to be affected. So if it's affecting me at that level, and it affected somebody who's a frontline worker,
Yeah.
if it's affecting a frontline worker, to be like, dude, like you can't, you got to have some people involved in this. So this piece will have trauma therapists on staff to facilitate the groups that come through. We have to. I do need to provide some gentle entry and a soft landing.
Yeah. That's amazing. Uh, I can appreciate that immensely. As you were talking and you were describing the feedback that you were getting um, from her, it immediately clicked into my head. That was going to be my next question. Are you going to have that? Um, and I want to just take a brief second here to express to the audience as well that if you're dealing with something that is tremendously deep, whether it's a physical experience, a trauma, or any of those types of things, do not be afraid to reach out to a therapist or somebody who can hold space with you uh, to help you walk through that period of time, to potentially help you to get some healing from that. A lot of people look, from a societal standpoint, they look at therapy as the person that's going to the therapy being weak, that they don't have strength to handle something. But it's not. It's not about that. And here I'm going to step in and express from my point of view of the years of myself being in therapy, psychotherapy, cognitive therapy. behavioral therapy, art therapy, across the board. And all of that started very shortly prior to a suicide attempt. Uh, and it got, the volume got turned up on the therapy after the suicide attempt. After I was in the hospital for 6 weeks and then started to transition to outpatient therapy, um, I had to really start looking at moving forward, but also moving forward with assistance. And I needed to have that space where I could go once a week and open up and share what I was experiencing, share what I was feeling. And I think it's tremendously needed, even more so today than back when I had that experience, because there's so many things that are coming at us from so many different directions. And you've expressed that this is part of how you're integrating this experiences digitally, and some of it is digital, because that's how everybody's consuming nowadays. It's digital, and it just because it's digital doesn't remove it from the the evil that can take place in those spaces. So I wanted to just bring that up and encourage the audience. If you're dealing with something, do not hesitate or be afraid to look for some kind of help or assistance, and be vigilant as within your own advocacy as well, because there's many a therapist that I went to that did not work out for me. It was not something that was good for me to be in the presence of. It was not something that was helpful, but I had to keep being my own advocate and moving forward in my search for the right fits. And I want to correlate that back uh, to the companionship of the horse. Um, in that symbiotic relationship, it's it's two parties working together to move closer, to be able to coexist and be one with each other. And looking for a therapist, looking for a space to where you can experience therapy, it's kind of the same similar situation. You have to be willing to take multiple actions to move towards each other, to get to a place of comfort and an understanding, to be able to allow that to expand and open up. So I just wanted to put that out there for the audience, because it's not within the creative community, it's not something that is discussed openly. That's why I'm doing this with this platform, to turn up the volume on it. And it's still stigmatized. And I very much dislike that. I want to see it to change. I want to see it have a drastic change. Um, so I can understand where you're going with this and what you're trying to accomplish, and it is going to be a legacy piece. I can just tell you from an outsider's perspective, from an empath's perspective, for someone who has a high intuition, um, because I can feel your heart, Christopher. I can feel your heart. I know where it's at. I know you've experienced this near death situation where um, the the end of life experience and looking back is assessed, and I can tell you absolutely want to leave a lasting legacy, and I commend you for doing this.
Wow. Thank you. Wow. Thank
Yeah,
you. Keepers.
yeah,
That's just,
it's powerful. It's going to be powerful. With with the way that you've got it set up, is it going to be able to be brought into the U.S.?
I'm hoping so. I've been introduced to a gallery in Dallas,
Okay.
once it's on the road. I do have an obligation to finish it. It's to finish it in Canada.
Okay.
There is. I have a cross Canada tour of doing 30 cities, 30 municipalities a year. Sorry, I got a fly in my face. Doing 30 cities a year over 33 months.
Okay.
And it's meant to hit some of the communities that are hard to reach.
Sure.
We're going to be in a tour bus and following, we'll be doing at that time once we get it fabricated, we'll be in a tour bus doing our own podcast on the road, talking to our intermediaries and people as we go through our country.
Nice.
And the goal is to have it go international. I would love to have that happen. I would love to see this in the United States, and I know that there is a need for it. The just so that you understand, the statistics are are universal. When we're dealing in Canada, we're talking about 30% of our population has experienced intimate partner violence or gender-based violence. And in 2024 in Canada, we had 163,000 reports. And that worked out to about 300 a day or one every 4 minutes.
Yeah,
That's an absurd statistic to be taking on.
for
And
sure.
those statistics still remain stubborn, and they are very similar in the United States. And this is going to be I'm really hoping will be something that can travel through the United States and go to galleries and be part of universities for exactly the same purpose. Because again, this is our universal experience as men. This is what we've all dealt with. And
Right.
there's not anybody that can say they haven't, because we all have. You've either been the perpetrator or you've been on the receiving end of it. And
Right.
so I appreciate your encouraging words that really kind of hit home. That was very generous.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. It's heartfelt, and honest from my perspective. It definitely is something that's going to be powerful, um, and emotional as well. Is there any thought to have this going into indigenous communities as well in Canada?
So yeah, so that will end up happening. And so one of the organizations that we've just approached is called Moosehide, and they do their own initiatives. The interesting thing with this is that because this is a universally male thing, it
Yeah.
doesn't really matter about race or creed or religion or orientation. It is the same thing that we've all dealt with. So it is uh, it is meant to be for everybody.
Yeah.
We've made this accessible for everybody. That if you were socialized at any point in your life as a boy or as a man, this is for you. Doesn't matter. You can be transsexual. You were at one point socialized as a boy, and you understand what this is. So
Right.
this allows everybody to have access and to be educated. And we've made it ADA compliant so that a wheelchair can fit and people with disabilities can fit. We've made it bilingual so that
Okay.
it's both French and English.
Wow.
And
Okay.
yeah, I've taken every step to make sure that this is inclusive regardless.
Excellent.
It needs to be inclusive.
Most definitely. Most
Yeah.
definitely. Well, I think that's a fantastic place for us to be able to wrap up today. And one of the things I always want to remind the audience at the end of each session or episode is, is something that's played out throughout your lifetime as well and your storyline. And that is listen to your heart, but also be kind to your mind.